Hey, what's going on, guys? Thanks for tapping in. There's been a very interesting debate as to who we should officially take at number four. I think I can confidently say for most of us, we feel like if there's a top edge prospect at four, we should grab him. Of course, there's some flyers out there for Ahmad Sauce Gardner, but generally it's either an edge or Gardner. It feels like now for the edge competition. We've been getting some recent news that the Jets are extremely high on Jermaine Johnson. We were just hearing, though, how well that Kayvon Thibodeaux has done in his interviews with us, and that we don't necessarily, fear the personality and brandishment that he seems to display quite often. We're more so willing to ride out with the bravado that he has. But it's very interesting nonetheless for me. From my guys' standpoint, uh, I've been the biggest Karloftis fan, so I feel like we could really maximize number four in either trade back situation, or if we really do want to grab an Ahmad Sauce Gardner, it's probably a little high, but it'd be perfect for us when we know that Karloftis, for a fact, should be there at 10. Um, the biggest thing, though, between the two players and Jermaine Johnson and Kayvon Thibodeaux, though, is if you kind of take a look at the paths and how things have gotten to this point for them. Kayvon Thibodeaux has come in as an absolute star stud since high school. Number one recruit. He touches down in Oregon freshman year. He puts up 9 sacks. And then things kind of seem to trail off from everything I picked up on. So while he's still shown flashes of dominance, I think if you speak to anybody in general terms about him, they're going to point to his first step quickness as being the most elite trait that he has. After that, he kind of has some pass rush moves, but it seems like he tries to beat people essentially with the same technique over and over. You'll see some pass rush plans there, but more often than not, he seems like he might be trying to out athlete people rather than actually having a full course of plan. I've seen a few recent breakdowns as well in terms of him essentially going after the gaudy sack numbers instead of necessarily playing within the scope of what the defense is asking him for as well. You package that up with some of the concerns that people have about his me first attitude and kind of, always pointing out his brand as a point of emphasis and not necessarily football. And that kind of takes away from a lot of the glory that he's achieved. For me, personally, I don't necessarily see the huge leaps and bounds and improvements. And that doesn't always necessarily have to come from the stats in and of itself. But from seeing the breakdowns and kind of hearing all the repeated stats and things like that, most of his sack numbers came his freshman year. He got 3 his sophomore year and the other 7 most recently. And then again, the biggest call out for me was I was able to consistently see on tape from what a lot of these breakdowns were that he would be leaving a lot of rushing lanes wide open en route to trying to sack the quarterback, which wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing if that's what he was asked to do. But since they moved him around in this quote unquote joker position, which basically means they pushed him around the alignment for whatever he should have seen the most success for on any given play, you would have to assume they would prep him for the run game. And so it's kind of like he completely abandoned that a little bit. So you kind of see him not necessarily on a downtrend necessarily, but you start to question the motor, the love for the football game, and then you don't necessarily see leaps and bounds and improvements. Whereas with Jermaine Johnson, he's stuck in Georgia's ridiculous defense for 2 years, where he can't necessarily see daylight. He's able to perform a little bit, right? I think he gets 6 sacks between those 2 years that he spends at Georgia, and then he ends up transferring over to was it FSU, and then suddenly he has this breakout 11 and a half sack season. But same thing with him. While the numbers look great, he's taking advantage of things where you can, which for me, I think is the most you should, really require at certain points when people bring up the level of competition, different things of that nature. A lot of his stuff he lucked into. The biggest issue I have with Jermaine Johnson in the top 10 is that any film breakdown you put on, you can see he doesn't necessarily have a plan. There's a lot of wasted steps in the beginning of his pass rush where he's trying to figure out if he's going to go inside or outside. And with most balls being out of there in, 2.5 seconds, you can't have the wasted steps. We need you to know you're forking inside, you're doing a swipe counter move to the outside, you're setting people up throughout the game. I don't necessarily see that from him at all. Now, what he does offer immediately, which is something Kayvon Thibodeaux can't necessarily say he does, is we should see elite run production from a Jermaine Johnson early on. So I'm curious if it's realistic, if we do pick a Jermaine Johnson. At this point, I'm really just trusting the coaching staff to say that they loved what he had at his disposal and they're willing to try to, develop and coach that up. Of course, if we're putting, everybody on the same playing field and mental plane, you would say Jermaine Johnson has a little bit of an edge because there's not questions about the love for the sport. You don't hear him talking about brands. There's nothing crazy that's, come out for Jermaine Johnson in that way. So the other slight knock as well for Thibodeaux is that he's 23. I believe he may be turning 24 going into the season. So he's one of those older-ish prospects as well, on top of the questions and certain things that he has going on. But you can't deny the athleticism that both of them show, but as well that elite first step and quickness that Kayvon Thibodeaux displays. So it's kind of a toss-up for me. I would love to still land our next great pass rusher. I don't know if it's either one of these two for us, especially when you're thinking about the first rounders. Joe Douglas has already put out two key factors. He likes very quote-unquote freaky athletes, essentially. He wants people with elite athleticism. And then the second thing is he wants people that essentially should be starters coming in. And so you can deal with maybe a little bit of a lackluster pass rush, potentially, if you're going to get elite run defense. I would feel like as maybe the deciding factor if it's really between those two and Kayvon Thibodeaux as well as Jermaine Johnson's on the board. But in that same conversation, I would say if you have questions about KT, you don't think Jermaine Johnson necessarily has the pass rushing chops this year. He can develop them. So, of course, this is a reason why they're signed to multi-year contracts. Why not go and maybe get a Trayvon Walker then, who's scored one of the highest relative athletic scores in the combine at his position ever, and develop those traits. I mean, you can essentially say the same thing, but he has so much more explosion to him compared to the other athletes. So it's really an interesting dilemma for us. I'm super excited. I can't wait for Thursday to come. But let me know what your guys' thoughts are. I've seen a good split recently in terms of why people love Kayvon Thibodeaux versus a Jermaine Johnson. If it's me, I'm doubling down on my instincts. I would find a way to get Karlaftis either safely at pick 10, or if you trade down and you hope he goes to those middle round picks, you make sure you scoop him up then. But let me know what your guys' thoughts are. Do we absolutely need to grab Kayvon Thibodeaux and run to the podium if he's there at 4? Or do we feel like Jermaine Johnson may be the better, let's say, long-term prospect for us, and maybe we see quick improvements from him? Either way, appreciate you guys as usual, and I'll catch up with you again.